Hello, Unitarians. Welcome to the third day of the Internet Measurement Village. Joining us today is Lai from the Measurement Lab, and she'll be telling you a bit about the work that they've been doing at MLab.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lai. I'm the project director of Measurement Lab. I'm broadcasting from Lower Manhattan in New York, and more specifically, my kitchen, because New York's reopening has meant construction is back, which means that there are several sledgehammers on my street. And so I'm in my kitchen because it's the furthest away from the street. I hope sound is okay. Arturo will tell me. I think we sound checked and I think it's fine. But sorry if you get a free noise show in the background. But as I said, project director of Measurement Lab. My background, just so you know a bit about me, I previously was at Equality, and that's actually how I got to attend the Internet Freedom Festival in the past, through working with the CINO and Deflect project. And coming from that background, I was initially interested in Measurement Lab, realizing or thinking through
the are you still there? I think the video just cut off a second there. Are you still on the line? I cannot hear you anymore. Let me see. We just had a little bit of networking difficulties here. Just hang on with us while we will we'll reconnect to Lai and see if we can restart the stream. It's ringing on my other device now. Let me see a second. Okay, maybe it is in fact an issue with my Skype on this side. So let's just bear with us for a minute here while we try to solve these technical issues. Apologies for the little intermission here. Well, I'll give you some music to entertain you while we wait. Yeah, sorry. There's something happening with Skype. Like the line fell. Now we're connected. Okay, now we're back. Can you do the screen share again? Actually, I figured out how to see at which point you are in the cursor, so there's actually no need to do that. I can do that.
Slide.
Okay, and we're back, I think. Hopefully, okay. Back online. So sorry for the issues, but I think yeah, off to you, Lai.
I think it would be a tech talk without technical difficulties. So great, we got it out of the way beginning. So don't know where it's out, but just to talk to the internet freedom community. I think there's a lot of room for the measurement projects of the world to be influenced and also useful to the folks that attend Internet Freedom Festival. So this is great. Thank you for organizing this. Today, my goal is really just to describe MLab enough so that the Internet Freedom community at large and also the measurement community within it can understand how to use us as a resource. Also open up the conversation around how we can be more of a resource in the future moving forward. So we'll take kind of different questions around what is MLab and what is it, how do we measure the internet, and all things that go with that. So starting with the question, what is MLab? I find it useful to start with our mission, which is to measure the internet, save the data, and make it universally accessible and useful. Of course, those are large ends, as all missions tend to be, but it does have hopefully you'll start to see how those make. So the first caveat is that to measure the internet, there are many ways to just measure on slide 5 if that's useful. There are many ways to measure the internet. We do so, the way that we so is a way that we hope will make it universally accessible and useful. Another place to start when thinking about what is MLab is with our origin story, and I'm on to the next slide. Thinking about kind of, what was the problem that Measure Lab was trying to solve back in 2008 when we were founded. The project's been around about 12 years. And at the time, the project came from starting with a conversation between internet researchers thinking about what were the resources that were missing from internet research world and be a useful resource for enabling research of the internet at scale. The things that folks to run. This, of course, is just something as big as the internet. You need a measurement infrastructure that is as close to the scale or is able to reach the scale of something as large as the internet. So that was one of the needs that people called out Another one was kind of just a question of data sharing, and there was a lack of ability to share rich data sets. So like if you did have this resource of these widely deployed servers, these experiments would like generate data. And so how even if you had that, how would you share that data between projects, between researchers, and also making it publicly accessible for policymakers and advocacy groups? How would one do that was a question. And so measure. And fast forward 12 years, widely also professionally maintained platform infrastructure, a pipeline that manages the data, or puts it into an accessible storage place where you can for free, which is BigQuery for us. And then it's also resulted in several tools that enable community collection of that data, and using of the measurement experiments. And then also, it's resulted in a community of users across the world that use our data. And it's also resulted in our team having all of the above. Team is society. We are a fiscally sponsored project of CSNS. A lot of sponsors projects in the OPA and infrastructure space. So myself and our program management and community lead, Chris, who, if you've interacted with measurement, our platform engineers are all housed there. Have had years currently. Google as a core contributor contributes in a number of ways, but one of them is by assigning a small team of software engineers to write open source code for our platform and pipeline. So our team is also made up of those folks. And we question of how we measure the internet. Measurement Village suggests there are several ways to do this. Just be kind of components that are useful to think about how lab specifically measures the internet. So there is, and I'm on slide 11 here. Thinking we host, I before referenced this for widely deployed servers on the internet, and the way that we reached that or solved that problem was by hosting servers in what we call off-net data centers around the world. We have about 500 and about C plus and like I said, off-net. And by off-net, we mean in ISPs interconnect with one another. Meaning the access network. So if a user, like any one of us tuning in today, has an internet connection, the path to content, the data centers that we host in are outside of their access providers. So it's if you have Spectrum, it's where Spectrum connects with other internet service providers to the internet, where we servers. And the idea here, the goal, the full path from user to content. So instead of measuring only within one network, we're measuring the entire pathway to content, meaning where we like to say we're measuring the where ISPs connect with one another. So these are all in commercial data centers as well, and this is the criteria that researchers initially called out, is that it was difficult to maintain experiments when they're purely in an academic environment, because it's just commercial ecosystems are kind of built to maintain servers in the way that experimenters were asking for the scale of their experiments. So these are all in commercial tier 1 data center net data centers. So on that platform, we run what we call measurement services. And these are proposed by tool builders. Sometimes they're academic computer scientists, sometimes network engineers, sometimes folks in the internet freedom community, and they're approved by our review. And so there's some technical criteria, but one that's both technical and not is for the measurement service to be open source. And we'll get into that later, but that's a critical component of our work, is that everything is open source so that we can all kind of see how we're getting the number that we're getting. The test clients, so when we say we're measuring the full path from user to content, the part of the way that we do this is that it's enabled by test clients running tests against the measurement services that we host, the server side. So anyone can develop a test. Unlike the measurement services, there's no approval necessary. And so some of the test clients are community developed. Some are ones that we write and maintain, but test clients run tests against these servers. So again, we have this off-net platform, and then tests all around that we maintain, and then test clients all around the world, some of which we maintain, some of which we don't, most that we don't, run tests against the measurement services hosted on our servers. The data that the tests generate is then stored in a public archive and can be parsed into BigQuery for that easy access that we talked about at the beginning. Some examples of test clients, normally I say the most popular is the Google search. If you Google how fast is my internet, the NDT, which is one of our measurement services that we'll talk about, an NDT test client is what comes up. I normally say that's the most popular one, but in the IF world, it actually might be the OONI integration of NDT and Dash. And these are two different measurement services that we host, and OONI has integrated them into their app as a test client to run tests against our servers. And we'll talk a bit more about each of these. So NDT and Dash are both measurement services that we host, but NDT tends to be the one that we talk about most when we talk about MLab data. The reason being, there's a couple different reasons. One, it's just been the longest, the test that's been on our platform the longest, and so by nature of just being there for the longest, it's often associated with MLab data the strongest, or has the strongest association with MLab data. It's also the test that we maintain, and so it's associated in that way. And also we just have the most data for it. And so just to say, when we're asking this question, how does Measurement Lab measure the internet? And when we're referring to MLab data, it's useful to remember that MLab data could refer to any one of the measurement services, or the data generated by any one of the measurement services that we host. But oftentimes we are referring to NDT data. And for that reason, we're going to talk kind of mostly about NDT data and what it can offer to the IF space. So there's a couple, so this section is to underscore the nuances of how MLab measures the internet. The off-net platform methodology that I'm describing applies to all of our measurement services. And then there's a couple nuances with NDT that are useful to know when using it, when using the data. So NDT, again, one of our measurement services, the most popularly used, it measures the single stream performance of bulk transport capacity. If you are a person who already knows what that means, great. If you're not, we're going to dig into that a little bit. The bulk transport capacity refers to the rate that a link can deliver data with TCP. And because TCP is in charge of getting packets across the wire reliably, this is essentially a measurement of the reliability of that link. There's another term in the world called link capacity that refers to the maximum bit rate of the link, which is, you can think of it as like the kind of maximum potential that link can hold. These are just different measurements. The confusing part is that they're both often conflated with the term internet speed. Often NDT is referred to as a speed test. There's actually no one definition of internet speed, which I'm likely preaching to the choir at the measurement village, but it's not such a clear cut definition. And so just to say, when we talk about MLab's data, which often means NDT data, it's useful to remember that it measures bulk transport capacity, which is different from link capacity. And link capacity is often what ISPs will refer to come up with advertised speeds. And so when you're thinking about what does MLab data offer, it's offering a specific measurement that's measuring the reliability of a link, not necessarily the maximum capacity. But again, confusing because both are conflated with the term speed. I'm on slide 17, if that's useful, Arturo. I am now going to the other part of the definition. NDT measures the single stream performance of bulk transport capacity, which we just talked about. Single stream. So modern web browsers will use multiple streams of data. But what can happen with that when you're testing with that, sometimes the measurement can then compensate for the packet loss over a single stream. And so it's just another way of measuring that can sometimes get closer to link capacity. But because it wouldn't represent that packet loss, NDT uses a single stream performance as an effective baseline for measuring a user's internet performance. And so again, this is just useful when thinking through what is MLab data good for. If we're talking about NDT data, this definition helps you understand exactly what it's telling you about your internet performance, which is the bulk transport capacity, which is measuring the reliability of a link, and the single stream performance, meaning one stream as a baseline for the multiple streams that might be opened during a web experience of getting from the user's device to the content. And so I describe these things because I think one question that we get a lot is, why are MLab test results different than X insert measurement here? And I think these four things are kind of useful points to remember when trying to answer that question. One, an MLab test, although NDT tests are most popular, MLab does not necessarily equate to NDT. So it's maybe useful to unpack that, like which measurement are you talking about that MLab hosts? And then unpacking that, it also, some of our tests differ due to the off-net platform methodology, meaning that we measure outside of an access network, which will return a different measurement than an on-net. Both are completely valid measurements, but just measure different things. Taking it down again to another level, thinking about how, so the off-net methodology applies to all of our measurement services, but NDT measures bulk transport capacity, which is just not the same as link capacity, which other tests might try to measure. And then even further down into that definition, it's only measuring a single stream, which we think is a really effective baseline, but it's not measuring a multi-stream or multiple streams. And so in that way, these all characterize how when you use an MLab speed test and it returns a different result, these are the reasons why. But that said, again, zooming kind of back out from NDT, we have these other measurement services. The platform is currently hosting Dash and WeHe. Dash was actually written by Simone Basso of the OONI team. I'm not sure if he's tuning in right now, but it's that other test that OONI has in their app as well, and that measures the quality of networks by emulating a video streaming player. I actually think a whole other presentation could be done on Dash alone, but I would let Simone speak to that more than myself. We also have a test called WeHe that measures the differential treatment of applications by ISPs, and that's developed by Dave Chaffnees at Northeastern University. Those are both currently hosted on the platform. I think I might have said this earlier, but they're not parsing into BigQuery currently. So if you're going into BigQuery, which we'll get into later, that's you are accessing NDT data. But this is something that we're working towards in the future, is getting more measurement services parsing into BigQuery and also hosting more in general. And we'll talk more about that. But just to say, the question that started this section is, how does MLab measure the internet? We have our off-net platform methodology, and then within that we have all the services that we host: NDT, Dash, and WeHe. NDT being the most popular in generating the largest amount of data currently, but other services being there as well. And you are able to develop a test client to use those services. And the last thing I'll mention here too is that for every single, I left off something on this side, but for every test that's run, we run what we call sidecar services. And so for every connection to an MLab server, we run a traceroute test from the server back to the client IP, which then demonstrates the hops that connection took. We also get incredibly useful information about TCP via packet traces and TCP info. Those are things where it's kind of a thing where if you know what that is, you'll know how valuable that is. If you don't, we're happy to do an intro. But all to say, it's all of these NDT tests, all of the WeHe tests, and all of the Dash tests that we get testing from clients against our services that we host are all generating these sidecar services. And so there's a large amount of data that, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but currently is kind of unexplored. So when you're thinking about how MLab can be a resource, know that those sidecar services are generating data every time someone runs how fast is my internet. So it's there and useful to remember. I had it on the next slide. So on slide 21, information about TCP info, which you can read more about and follow up. I posted these with the idea that I'd post them later, so folks can follow up if they didn't get the text in time. So going on to slide 22, then the next question is, okay, so that's how we measure, but what makes that valuable? What makes that something that a project could use or an internet user can use to understand more about the internet? And one thing to note, and going back into focusing on NDT data, as that's the most data that we have, the value of a test will never be in that single test. Any single test is limited as an indicator by all of the multiple factors that can connect or that can affect a connection. But when you put those tests in aggregate, when you start to say, okay, I got this result and all the people in my area got this result, all the people in my region got this result. Furthermore, all the people in my country in specific areas got this result, and you are able to then start understanding the different factors that those folks have in common that are getting a specific result. Then you can really have a better sense of the patterns and the trends that are happening on the internet at large. And this goes back to the kind of origin story of like what was the problem that MLab was trying to solve was having an internet measurement resource that was focused on the scale at large. So the data is really most useful when put in aggregate. So it's always going to be such that when you run a test, it can tell you, the results of your NDT measurement, but really where the value is going to be derived is when you put that measurement next to other measurements. I may or may not be preaching again to the choir here at the Measurement Village, but it is something that we try and impress upon folks when they're putting it into, say, their app, because then they'll get questions about what does this test mean and why do I care about this number? And the answer will always be that we care about this number in relation to the rest of the numbers. And so part of what enables aggregate data to be so useful is to have a lot of it. And we do have a lot of it. And I'm on slide 24. Currently, we get about 3 million new NDT measurements per day. This is largely in part to being the thing that you Google, being the thing that comes up when you Google how fast is my internet. So as of 2020, actually, we have about 2 billion rows of NDT data, it's just a lot of data. And so when we're talking about the value being in the ability to see patterns and trends, it's enabled by having a massive amount of data to pull from and to drill into as needed into specific regions, into specific times, while also being able to reference the larger patterns at scale. The biggest thing the biggest feature that we can point to for the NDT data set is that it's longitudinal. It's been consistently measuring the internet for about 10 years now, and that's a long time. And it's the approach that we take here, or by pointing out that it's longitudinal, we're pointing out the approach that we're taking in that it's just getting as much data as possible. There's certainly merit to collecting a small amount of data and a specific amount of time, but just different approaches, different styles. The one we take is getting as much of it as possible, and using that ability then to be able to look at the patterns and trends over time versus in one moment. And we think that's valuable because, with something as dynamic as the internet and something as large as the internet, you need something that's kind of tracking it over not just 1 year, but several. So drilling back into what makes the data valuable, it's large, it's longitudinal, and there's so much of it. The data is also valuable because all of that data is then open, free, and public. And so those are all words that vaguely mean the same thing sometimes, but so in the context that we use them, it's open, meaning that all of our, as I mentioned, all of our measurement services are open, run on open source code. So you can always look at the code. Anyone who can read code can verify that how the calculation is being done, how the number that you're getting is being calculated. It's then archived publicly, so it goes into a public archive after the test is run and then is parsed into BigQuery. But whether you're looking at the raw data or whether you're looking at BigQuery, basically the entire life cycle of a measurement is open, and that allows for verifiable open science to be done with the measurements that we're collecting. This becomes extremely important for in the policy and advocacy space, as it enables conversations around data that everybody has access to. This is obviously getting at the kind of problem where proprietary data is often really useful, but not accessible. And so this is providing a resource outside of a public resource outside of all of these types of other barriers that have the reasons for being there, but this is enabling a public version of the data that we can all access and verify from beginning to end. So as I said, the measurement services themselves are open source, and also the reference clients, meaning the clients that we provide to help others make their own clients to test against our services or our servers. I already mentioned the platform and pipeline data is publicly archived. And then one thing to underscore is that BigQuery is free to access. So there's going to be a link later on in the slides that you can reference later. Also, our website, measurementlab.net, has the documentation, but you just sign up for our Discuss mailing list. It's that easy, it's free, and it's just, I'm going to say it again, there's so much data and it's all free. And there's very rarely that much stuff for free, and you get something for free. You normally don't get access to something as large as our data set. So going to the next slide, another reason that our data is valuable is that it's user contributed, meaning that all of our tests are active. Users opt into them. So there's sometimes users will opt to have recurring measurements, and so they're not like clicking every single time, but there is always a point where a user is saying, yes, that's the I want to enable this measurement. So it's user contributed. It's also by nature of the off-platform methodology, it's representative, meaning it's coming from the perspective of the user connecting to the internet. So there are several different ways to measure the internet, and they can all measure different parts of that path, but we measure the full path from user to content outside of an Access ISP, meaning that it's representative of a user experience, because all of our measurement services run on that off-net platform. All of them are going to inherently represent that pathway from user to content. And they're also global. Recently, a stat that we pulled is that 2/3 of our tests are run from outside of the US. I'll flag that this is not perfect, and I want to talk about that more, meaning that we could certainly use help increasing our test count in certain areas, but it is by nature of being accessible by anyone on the internet, a global representation of internet users from all around the world. And so there's really, there's a lot of data there that's representing a lot of different areas. And so again, it's a consistent representation as well. And then another note too is that we value user privacy. We know that any measurement that we want to continue collecting at this scale needs to take user privacy in mind. And so we only collect the IP address, and it's not tied to any of your other personal information. We don't collect any other information. The measurement services are not allowed to. So no other data about your computer or network is collected. But if you do run into the situation where you ran a test and then you realize you don't want your IP address to be in our data, you're able to do so by following the process outlined in our privacy policy. And this is something that I know is important to the internet freedom community, coming from thinking about these issues myself. I know this is important. So if there's feedback on how to do this better, we're open to discussing. So moving into, well, to finish that up, so those are all this kind of 5 slides we're thinking about. So you have all this data, what makes it valuable, and how can that be used in your work? Then moving into slide 28 and down, I won't dig too much into this so I can leave time for questions, but accessing the MLab data is straightforward. Through BigQuery, you're able to use that tool to dig into it. You can also, if you're not a data person, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. I'm gonna try really hard not to. Okay. The visualization website, which is actually currently under development, but the visualization site is a good kind of starter to get a sense of, maybe I just want to look at a specific region at a specific time, and as fitting that use case of I'm just interested a little bit and I want to know what else, or kind of get a sense of what could be possible, the Viz site is a good place to start. From there, you'll likely want to get into BigQuery, and that's where we're happy to provide you support. That's part of what the team at CSNS offers, is mostly Chris is able to offer answers to your support emails, and we're there to make the experience of using the data as easy as possible. So just to say, if you're wondering where to dig in, you don't have to just do it by yourself. On the note of the Viz site, currently, if you go to the link that's listed there, we have these Datastudio reports. And this has actually been kind of not an experiment, but a way of proving out for us that our data is usable in other platforms and that there are ways to engage with the data beyond BigQuery. And so we've made these Datastudio dashboards to represent both the US and the global internet measurements that we've gotten from NDT through COVID-19 specifically, but there's different week selectors. You can look at the week and look at it, how it changed through time, and then drill down into whatever region you might be interested in. And so actually, I'm not sure if that link will be right, but if you go to the Viz site that's linked on slide 29, that's a good place to start if you're thinking, okay, well, you talked about internet measurement for 40 minutes. What is she talking about? That's a good place to start. I'm going to go to slide 35 now and talk about, well, this section is getting at this question of how does MLab support community research? How can we think of MLab as a what kind of support does MLab provide for communities that want more specific information about their internet performance? And this is kind of getting at that thing that I called out, where we do have such a large data set, but oftentimes communities will say we need more about our region specifically. While it's understood that it's useful to then compare it to the broader trends and patterns, of course, people, myself included, are going to be interested in things that are happening around them or in the internet freedom community, probably. Oh, my dog just howled. Are interested in specific regions. So one tool that I wanted to bring attention to is called Murakami, and it's a container-based service that enables automatic recurring measurements. So it's basically this idea of like, you don't want to have to click the button every single time you want to run a test. And that enabling automatic recurring measurements enables longitudinal measurements, meaning measurements over time. And so in partnership with Simmons University and with support from the US IMLS, which is Institute for Museum and Library Services, we've been able to develop Murakami to run on on-premise measurement devices. And we're using Odroids, but you could theoretically use anything that runs Docker. And the idea is that you have these devices we were looking at specifically in libraries, but we think there's large potential for any community anchor institutions globally, where you put these devices and they run measurements randomly throughout every day. And in that way, you can get a more granular sense of how that connectivity, how that performance is changing over time. And so you get all of these different different tests to create a larger picture, like we talked about, the individual test data never being as useful as the aggregate test data. One other thing to note is that, so I mentioned that it runs an NDT test, or I think I did, but the Murakami can also run other tests. So there's an opportunity for collaboration here with the IF community, thinking about what kinds of tests would be useful to run from a device that's just running tests all day about internet performance. So that's one way that, one example of how Measurement Lab tries to support community research, as well as a point of collaboration, perhaps, for the IF community. Digging more into that question, and this is my last section, and then I'll take questions. how can MLab be a resource for the internet freedom community? These are all kind of just thoughts to open the discussion, but this is actually an open question for myself to you. So I'm interested in either hearing questions at the end or scheduling a follow-up conversation. But these are some ideas. One open point of possible collaboration. Our platform went through an upgrade at the end of 2019 to be managed by Docker and Kubernetes. And anyone who's familiar with that transition knows how big of a deal that is. But I came in at the end of it, so I didn't have to do anything. But just to say, this was a huge upgrade, and it sets us up kind of better than ever in the whole history of the project to take on new measurement or proposals for measurement services. And so there's a big opportunity here for, I think, people in the internet freedom space to be thinking about how can MLab be used as a resource for the measurement of internet freedom. I think that the internet freedom community has a pretty unique and important perspective that I would personally like to prioritize for the meeting of a healthy internet and an open internet. And we welcome that perspective on how to use our platform to test that or how to measure it. And also a note I'll add here is that in the next years, we'd like to start prioritizing global engagements. We are a mostly US-based team, and I'd personally like to start looking outside of that into the global context. And one way to do that is to work with global or researchers from around the world, which I know the Internet Freedom Community has. So all to say, the platform is now more than ever ready to accept or not to review proposals for the measurement services that we host. And I would love to talk about how that can be possible in the process there. And just brainstorming ideas, I think, can be really generative. Another way to we can maybe be a resource is if you integrate our tests into your clients. So for example, again, the OONI app does this. They use NDT and Dash. So you can, if your tool is providing something where it would be useful for the user to have a better understanding of their internet performance or of their streaming capabilities or ISP preferential treatment, you can integrate these clients and any other measurement services that we might host in the future into your application. And like the Google search test and like the OONI application, the user will get the results of their measurement as well as, and their measurement will then be put into our public data set to contribute to this larger project of internet research. So that is another way. You can also ingest our data. You can reap the benefits of other people putting putting our clients into their applications. And so recently, actually, Siphon did this. I'm not showing my screen, so I'm not going to show it. But they integrated NDT data alongside the OONI data and with their specific region of interest and also with a date time picker. So it's enabling this ability to see the data that's useful to them side by side. And so there's also, similar to the previous example of like if it's useful for your user to understand their internet performance, it's also then possible for it to be useful for your tool itself, for the tool developers themselves to understand internet performance in a specific region where you're developing. And so just to say, another way to use this as a resource is to ingest our data into a dashboard of sorts, or just use it in general, using BigQuery, using the Viz site, and letting us help you along the way if needed. Another possible way of us being a resource is, I'm not going to get too in the weeds here, but as described on our off-net platforms, off-net servers, we host measurement services. And so the server side of what we host for NDT is now able to be run using Docker. So you can, when it's hosted on our off-net servers, that's what's enabling this kind of test from. user to content. But if you're looking to just measure a segment of the network, then you can host NDT server anywhere where you can host Docker, and then run a client wherever you'd like, likely from your device, but wherever. And the NDT can be run in that part of the path. And so there's an opportunity here to run your own NDT server and use it to better understand a pathway. Actually, NDT7, which is a new version of this protocol that Simone Basso wrote, just to call out. Again, Simone is great, supports BBR and runs over TLS and uses modern WebSockets. If you know what that means, then you're probably excited. If you don't, it's implementation details that we are happy to talk through if you are interested in using it. And then I'll just close with just potential areas of research that I'm particularly interested in, our team is interested in. I'm excited for this Measurement Village opportunity to understand other projects better. My goal was to kind of use this presentation as a conversation starter, because I would love to understand how our data sets can complement one another. For example, what can ripe atlas probes tell us that our platform cannot? But to do that, it's always there's going to be the introductory step of understanding what one does and what the other does. And so just to say, after this village, it would be great to follow up with any of the other measurement projects that are presenting to think about what our data sets can tell us about parts of the internet that the other ones are measuring or not measuring. And so just to say that's a potential area of research and collaboration. One part that I noted is that our traceroute data is largely unexplored. And a recent question that we were thinking about is what can it tell us about hops across borders? There's more to say about that, but it's just to throw it out there that that's a potential area of research. And then something I'm particularly interested in is understanding how all of these data sets can, I think probably something that most of us are interested in, are how can these data sets provide meaningful metrics and indicators to help monitor and maybe even predict, who knows, events that put internet freedom at risk. And so a concrete example would be how can MLab data be used how can we look at it in instances of throttling and maybe think about what the metric-based definition of throttling would be to understand what's happening when a country experiences a statewide censorship event via throttling. And so these are all just potential areas of research. I'm just throwing them out there as maybe a start to a conversation. But I'm hoping that through this presentation, you're able to understand a little bit more about how MLab works and how it can be used as a resource in your work. I feel like I should bow or something, but I'm done, and I'm happy to accept questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lei, for that very interesting presentation. So we have received several questions that people left on the OONI channel, on YouTube, and on the pad. I should also say apologies for, in the beginning, the small technical glitches. As you can see, we're still figuring out how to make the stream work, but sometimes some stuff happens. So the first question we have is from Simone, and he says, what are the main obstacles preventing MLab from deploying more servers close to users in the global south? As part of censorship throttling research, it is often useful to look at the typical characteristics of end-to-end channels, for example, bandwidth, RTT, etc., towards servers off-country vis-a-vis servers that are inside the country. Hashtag asking for a friend.
Oh, Simone, that's a great question. I actually don't have specifics to point to in terms of the barriers. I would just say that it's something we're interested in. Everything, I mean, this is funny because I think we've talked about this, but I just think it's something that we would like to prioritize. I mean, that's the answer I can give. I don't have any specifics to point to in barriers, but that is something that we've thought about and want to do.
So the other question, another question comes from David F. And he asks, do different versions of TCP, for example, Reno versus Cubic, matter for the single stream NDT test? Do NDT clients typically use the operating system's TCP?
Okay, I might need you to repeat that last one, but just to say, yes, it does affect it. And NDT7 supports BBR, and so that's going to be the benefit of using NDT7 in the future. It does depend on the kernel of the server that NDT is using. Whoever asked that question, I can point you to the team members that know or that care deeply about this. But just to say, the short answer is yes. And then can you repeat the second part of the question?
The second part of the question was, do NDT clients typically use the operating system's TCP?
It will depend on the server of the NDT server and what that's hosting. And actually, if Simone is on, can answer more, but it's an answer.
Okay. Yeah, maybe if somebody has some more insight to share on this, you can leave it in the chat. There is some lag in the stream, so we'll go ahead answering the other questions, and we can update later maybe. So another question comes again from Simone. Are there specific limits on the number of tests Murakami can run per day?
Yeah, it uses our service that limit our rate limiters, so it's limited to that. I think it's about 4 per day. I hope I'm not misquoting, but there are limits. We don't want you to get banned by our own rate limiters, so we recommend that there's no more than 40 per IP per day, and so Murakami would not exceed that.
Okay. And I guess related to this, there's also, still from Simone, would it be possible to add censorship measurements to Murakami, for example, OONI?
Yes. My short answer is yes. I don't know as much about the OONI test, and that's actually why this whole village is happening. But yeah, Murakami is designed to be able to run multiple tests. So short answer is yes, and we would just have to talk about details.
Okay, cool. So we have another question coming from Leonid. He says, I'm working with a university lab named Censored Planet. We'd love to use NDT for our research, and we've already prototyped integration with NDT7 endpoints using OpenAPI. That's an awesome service. What's the correct procedure to integrate measurement lab services in our research app running experiments? Should we register to use existing services to be good network citizens, or should we treat existing OpenAPI as open for all? And then there's a where should we start if we want to extend some of the measurement services running on the off-net platform? Staying within the platform limitations, of course.
Right. So there's 2 things there. For NDT specifically, I just recommend getting in touch with us through our website. You can reach out to support at Measurement Lab, and we can, I think maybe we've talked to, we definitely talked to Censored Planet in the past, so maybe I've talked to this person before, but just suggest reaching out and we can point you in the right direction. But our website has documentation on how to integrate a client or NDT into a client. For the OpenAPI, I'm not as familiar with that, but I do know that we have a new API coming out soon that we'll recommend that clients use. And so I would just recommend getting in touch with our support email address.
Great. Another question comes from KMC. Are there countries that you observe variance in speed test results between port 443 and port 80 from the same vantage point?
I don't. Oh, go ahead.
It continues. Above normal variance between tests due to different applications of filtering or throttling.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have an answer to that off the top of my head, but I feel like someone on our team would, and that's something that we'd be interested in talking about for sure. yeah, I would just recommend reaching out. We can talk about that further, as that's something that, yeah, I think people have looked into before.
And they also asked, as a follow-up, are any other ports tested?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay, I think that wraps it up. I see from Matt Mattis replied in the chat. I think in relation to the previous question that had to do with if the operating system TCP stack was being used by NDT, saying NDT uses the TCP provided by the kernel. So if that answers your question, David F. And Simone adds saying, also the client uses